She's not who she told you she was. And the baby isn't yours.
Okay. So let me set the scene for you. Because you need to understand exactly what kind of room this is before we go any further. Kang Seo-jin had never been whispered to in his life. Not like that. Not by someone who said it the way you say something you have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to put down. Not at his own engagement party. Not in front of 300 people who had spent the last 2 hours eating his food, drinking his wine, and congratulating him on finally choosing a woman worthy of the Kang name. He was standing at the edge of the terrace, champagne glass in hand, looking out at Seoul spread below him like something he owned, which, in many ways, he did. 41 years old. Heir to Kang Capital, the most powerful private investment firm in South Korea. A man who did not attend events. Events were held because of him. And then the girl appeared at his elbow. She came out of nowhere. That was the first thing. 1 second she wasn't there, and then she was close and unhurried. Dark skin, natural hair pinned up, wearing the simple black uniform of the catering staff. Young. Maybe 24, 25. Jamaican accent so slight it only surfaced on certain syllables, like something she had learned to keep mostly out of sight. She leaned in just close enough. And she said it. She's not who she told you she was. And the baby isn't yours. She pulled back before he could respond. Before he could even fully process what had just entered his ear. She set a glass on the railing beside him, lifted the empty one from his hand with the ease of someone who had been doing this all evening, and walked back through the terrace doors without looking at him again. Like she hadn't just detonated something. Like the world hadn't just tilted. Seo-jin stood there. The city glittered below him. Somewhere behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, he could hear his fiancée laughing, that particular laugh, bright and perfectly placed, and 300 guests applauding something he had missed entirely. He set the champagne glass down on the railing. Very carefully. And then he turned around. Now before we go any further, you need to understand something about Kang Seo-jin. Because this is not a story about a man who got fooled. That is too simple. Too convenient. This is a story about a man who was shown exactly what he wanted to see, in exactly the order that would make him stop asking questions. And the person who built that performance, built it carefully, brick by brick, over 2 years, understood him well enough to know exactly which doors to leave open and which ones to keep locked. He didn't stumble into this. He walked into it. Let's go back. 18 months earlier, Kang Seo-jin had not been looking for anyone. That was the thing his mother had never understood about him. She had spent the better part of a decade presenting him with women, daughters of chairmen, graduates of SKY universities, women who arrived to dinner already knowing his investment portfolio and pretending they didn't. He was polite. He was always polite. And he always walked away. Not because he was cold. Because he was precise. And precision, in people, was extraordinarily rare. He met Yoon Jisoo at a private art auction in Busan. She was standing in front of a painting that nobody else in the room was looking at, a small, almost aggressive work, all dark blues and fractured geometry, tucked into a corner between 2 larger pieces that were getting all the attention. She wasn't performing contemplation. She wasn't holding her wine glass at an angle designed to be noticed. She was just looking at it, head slightly tilted, like she was having a private argument with it that she intended to win. He stood beside her for 4 minutes before either of them spoke. "It's angry," he said. "It's honest," she replied, without looking at him. Most people find those 2 things difficult to tell apart. She turned to meet his gaze and she did not smile immediately. That was the thing. She waited for a full beat before the smile came. Like she was deciding whether he had earned it. He thought about that beat for 3 weeks afterward. They were engaged for a year. His mother, who had long since stopped expecting anything from him in this department, approved with a warmth that surprised even her. Jisoo was impeccable. Cultured, composed, gracious in rooms where grace was a survival skill. She came from a respectable family in Daegu, her father a retired academic, her mother involved in various charitable foundations. Clean history. Verifiable background. His people had checked, of course. They always checked. Everything added up. For months into the engagement, Jisoo told him she was pregnant. He remembered the exact moment. A Tuesday evening in his apartment, dinner things still on the table, rain on the windows. She had looked at him with those considering eyes, the ones he had fallen for in a room full of paintings, and she had said it watching his face, reading his reaction with an attention he had mistaken, until this moment, for love. He was going to be a father. He had driven to his mother's house at 9:30 that evening and told her in the entrance hallway, still in his coat. She had grabbed both his hands. Her eyes had gone wet. He hadn't seen that in years. He spent the next month rearranging his entire life around a future he could now see clearly for the first time. What he did not know, what nobody had told him, what he had no mechanism to find out, was that Jisoo had made a phone call the morning after she told him. A call that lasted 6 minutes. To a number that did not appear anywhere in her contact list under its real name. And the voice on the other end of that call had said, simply, "Good. Stay on schedule." Her name was Simone. That is where we have to go now. Because nothing that happens at that engagement party makes sense without understanding who Simone Campbell is and why she is pouring champagne for 300 people in a penthouse she was not invited to as a guest. Simone Campbell, 25, from Kingston, Jamaica by way of London by way of Seoul, did not work for the catering company. Not really. She worked for herself. For the past 3 years, since the morning she walked out of the offices of Kang Capital's third-tier subsidiary in Seoul with a letter of termination, 2-month severance, and a burning certainty that what she had found inside that company's financial architecture was not supposed to be found. She had been an analyst. Junior level, a position that gets you access to just enough information to be useful and not enough to be dangerous. Except Simone had a particular mind that notices when numbers are telling 2 different stories at the same time. She had flagged it internally first. That had been her mistake. The flag disappeared within 72 hours. Her access level was reduced. And 3 weeks later, she was called into a meeting that lasted 9 minutes and ended with that letter. She had gone home to her apartment in Mapo, sat on her kitchen floor, and thought about her options. She could go to the authorities. She had considered this seriously. But what she had was fragments, patterns, anomalies, a structure whose shape she could see but not yet fully prove. Not yet. So she had done something else instead. She had started building the file. 3 years. She worked other jobs, restaurants, events, so much work that kept her close to the edges of the world she was investigating without ever being visible inside it. She was patient in a way that people who have never had to be patient cannot understand. She kept her profile small. She asked questions of people. She followed the architecture of what she had found, slowly, the way you follow a thread through a dark room, one dangerous step, then another, then another. And at the end of that thread she had found Jisoo. Not an accident, not a coincidence, a placement. Jisoo Yoon, whose real history was not what his people had found, because the real history had been replaced with something cleaner 18 months before she walked into that auction in Busan. Jisoo, who was not pregnant by Kang Seo-jin. Jisoo, who had been placed inside his life by the same network that had been running money through Kang Capital's subsidiary structure for 4 years, using his name, his firm, his reputation as the architect of something he knew absolutely nothing about. Simone had the evidence. All of it. Organized, sourced, documented in detail that takes 3 years to assemble and approximately 45 minutes to destroy a person with. She had one decision left to make. How to give it to the right person without becoming a problem that disappears. The engagement party had not been her first choice. But it was her best option. Because after the party, Seo-jin was leaving for 3 weeks in Tokyo. And the network had a timeline. Things were moving. She had maybe 72 hours before the window she had spent 3 years building closed permanently. So she had called a friend who knew the catering supervisor. She had worked 3 events at this venue before tonight, building familiarity. She knew the terrace rotation. She knew which moment Seo-jin stood alone. She had one sentence, had been carrying it for weeks, turning it over, sharpening it down to the smallest possible shape. A sentence that could not be ignored. That could not be filed away and forgotten. She's not who she told you she was. And the baby isn't yours. She had practiced it in her bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning. She had said it to him at 9:20. And now she was back in the kitchen, hands moving through the service rotation like nothing had happened, watching the door. He found her in 11 minutes. She had expected 12, maybe 15. He was faster than she had calculated, which told her something about a man he actually was underneath the composure. He came through the kitchen door, looked across the room until he found her, and walked toward her with the controlled energy of someone who is furious and has decided not to perform it. "Outside," he said. One word. Quiet as anything. She followed him to the service corridor. He turned to face her. His expression was not what she had expected. She had prepared for cold anger, for dismissal, for a brand of arrogance that men in his position wore like a second skin when challenged by someone they had no framework for. She had prepared for him to not believe her. What she had not prepared for was the look on his face that said some part of him already did. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question. A demand for something true. "My name is Simone Campbell. I used to work for your subsidiary in Mapo. Analytics Division. I was terminated 3 years ago for flagging irregularities in the fund routing structure." Something moved behind his eyes. "I have the file, all of it. The fund architecture, the shell routing, the network behind it, and the evidence of how Ji Soo-yoon was placed in your life and why. I have documentation of the paternity situation. I have communications. I have 3 years of work in a format that your legal team can verify within 2 hours. Why give it to me? Why tonight? Because they're moving in 72 hours, and after that, the money moves, the network dissolves, and everything that happened inside your company becomes your responsibility whether you knew about it or not. Your name is on everything, Mr. Kang." That was the point. The corridor was quiet. Behind the kitchen door she could hear the clatter of service, the muffled sound of 300 people still celebrating. "And what do you want for the file?" She had thought about this question for 3 years. Had turned it over more times than she could count. "I want my job back, the one I should never have lost. And I want the person who made that flag disappear to be in a room with your lawyers before the end of the week." He reached into his jacket pocket, produced his phone, and made a call that lasted 40 seconds. She could not hear what he said. When he hung up, he looked at her with a look she had not seen on him all evening. Like something had come into focus. "Send the file to this number," he said, holding the phone so she could see a contact. "Tonight. My head of legal will call you within the hour." He turned to go back through the kitchen door. Then he stopped. 3 years, you spent 3 years on this." "Yes." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" "Because they would have buried it, and you wouldn't." He stood there for 1 more second. Then he walked back through the door. What happened next happened fast. His legal team had the file by 11. By midnight they had verified the fund architecture. By 1 in the morning, 3 phone calls had gone to 3 different agencies across 2 countries. By 2, the network's timeline had been disrupted in ways they would not fully understand until morning. Jisoo was still at the party when 2 men appeared at her side with the unhurried energy of people who were not there to make a scene. She looked at their faces. Then she looked across the room for Seo-jin. He was standing by the window. Looking at her. Not with rage. Not with devastation. With a look of a man who has just watched something he thought was real become something he can now see clearly for the first time, and is carefully deciding what he is going to do with that clarity. She had studied this man for 18 months. She knew every readable thing about his face. She had never seen that look before. She went without a scene. She had always been intelligent. And intelligent people recognize, at a certain point, when the angle is gone. The guests noticed. Of course they noticed. 300 people in a room do not miss the moment the evening's guest of honor is walked out by men nobody introduced. The murmuring started slowly, then spread across the room the way fire moves when it finds something dry. Seo-jin did not address the room. He set his glass down, straightened his jacket, and walked out of his own party. He found Simone in the car park at the back of the building. She was sitting on the low wall near the service entrance, shoes still on, which he noticed because it seemed like a night where shoes should have come off by now. She had her phone in her hand and she was looking at nothing in particular, with her of someone whose nervous system is just beginning to understand that a thing they have been running toward for 3 years has actually arrived. He sat down beside her. Not too close. Left space. For a while neither of them said anything. The city made the sound cities make at 2 in the morning. Distant, indifferent, continuous. The flag you raised, in Mapo. What exactly did you find? She told him. All of it. Not the summarized version she had given in the corridor, the real version, the full 3 years of it, the way the architecture had revealed itself layer by layer, the moment she had almost stopped because it felt too large, the morning she found Jisoo's placement documentation and sat in her kitchen for 2 hours before she could continue. He listened without interrupting. That was the thing. He just listened, the way someone listens when they are genuinely trying to understand rather than waiting for the next place to speak. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You were 22 when they let you go. Yes. And you stayed in Seoul. I needed the proximity. He nodded, looked at his hands. I owe you an apology, on behalf of my company. For what happened 3 years ago. That should never. You didn't know, that's not the point. She looked at the tiredness in his face. The lines that appear on a person when something they built their certainty around has just been taken apart in front of them. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just realized how long he had been standing on ground that was never solid, and was still deciding what to feel about that. For what it's worth, the painting in Busan. The angry one that she was standing in front of. I know that painting. It was sold at a private auction 14 months before that night. It shouldn't have been at that event. It was placed there, not a question. The whole evening was, Simone said. The auction, the painting, the position she was standing in. Everything you thought you noticed organically, you were supposed to notice it. He sat with that for a long time. Then, he said, the beat. Sorry. Before she smiled. That first night. She waited a full beat before she smiled and I thought, he stopped. I thought it meant she was real. Simone said nothing. Because there was nothing to say to that. Because that was the most honest and most devastating thing she had heard anyone say in 3 years of learning exactly how this particular operation worked. They had known him well enough to build a beat into the performance. Had studied what he responded to and given it to him in the sequence that would make him stop asking questions. That was the thing that sat at the bottom of all of it. Not the fraud. Not the network. Not even the 3 years she had spent in its margins. The fact that someone had looked at this man and decided that his capacity to recognize something real was the most efficient door to walk through. I'm sorry, and she meant it. He looked at her, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that the room would have noticed. Just a small movement. Like weight redistributing. The position, the one you asked for. Head of Financial Forensics. Independent reporting line, no subsidiary interference. It doesn't exist yet, I'm going to create it. If you want it. Simone looked at this man. Who had lost his fiancée, his certainty, and 2 years of his life inside of one evening. Who was sitting in a car park at 2 in the morning making a job offer to a woman he had met 2 hours ago in a service corridor. Who had listened to 3 years of her work without once asking her to summarize it faster. I'll need to see the contract, obviously, he said. I practiced that sentence, the one I said to you on the terrace. In my bathroom mirror. 6 in the morning. How many times? 43. 43. The first 20 were too aggressive. The next 15 were too apologetic. I burned the notes. He laughed. An actual laugh, sudden and unguarded, the one which arrives when your body has been holding something impossible for hours and finally finds somewhere to put it down. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then it settled. But it had been real. She had heard it. She stood up. Smoothed her uniform. I'll send the contract details to your legal team, she said. Monday? Monday. He agreed. She walked toward the car park exit. Stopped after about 8 steps. Mr. Kang Seo-jin. She turned back. The painting, the real one. The angry one. It's in a private gallery in Itaewon. I found it 6 months ago. I thought you should know where it actually is. Is it still angry? Still honest, she said. And she walked out. She filed the formal employment paperwork on Wednesday. The contract was everything she had asked for and one thing she hadn't, a formal written apology from the board for the termination 3 years prior, signed by every sitting member. She read it twice at her kitchen table. Then she folded it and put it somewhere she would not need to look at often but wanted to know was there. The network unraveled over the following 6 weeks. Efficiently, in the way that things unravel when the person holding the thread has been patient enough to find the beginning of it. The people involved did not go loudly. They went the way Jisoo had gone, with a composure of the intelligent court, already somewhere else behind their eyes, already calculating the next version of events. There wasn't one. Not this time. Seo-jin restructured the subsidiary architecture entirely. It took for months and cost more than the network had ever made through it. He did it anyway. Precision, in the end, was what he had. And he applied it in the only direction he had left. He visited the gallery in Itaewon on a Thursday afternoon. The painting was exactly where Simone had said it was. Small. Aggressive. Tucked into a corner where you could walk past it 6 times without seeing it properly. He stood in front of it for a while. Then he bought it. He didn't tell her for 3 weeks. When he did, in a message, late on a Sunday, brief and awkward in the way that genuine things sometimes are, she read it twice, put her phone face down on her kitchen table, and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she smiled, a smile that arrives before you decide to let it. She typed back 2 words. Good taste. He replied in under a minute. I'm told it took me a while. Here is the thing this story keeps coming back to. The most sophisticated trap is never the one built from lies. It is the one built from the truest possible version of what you want. The beat before the smile. The painting in the corner. The woman who waits for you to earn it. Someone had looked at Kang Seo-jin, had studied him completely, and had decided that his greatest vulnerability was not his wealth, not his pride, not his name. It was his capacity to recognize something real. They used the best of him against him. And the person who undid all of it was a 22-year-old analyst from Kingston who had found one wrong number in a spreadsheet and decided, instead of walking away, to follow it all the way to the end. That hits you differently, doesn't it? When you think about the things in your own life you almost didn't look at them twice. Look, if you made it to the end of this, first of all, respect. That was a full journey and you stayed for every second of it. Which means you're exactly who needs to be here for what we have coming next. Drop a comment and tell me, when did you first suspect Jisoo? Because I read every single one and I genuinely want to know. Like this if Simone deserved that job from the jump. Subscribe if you want to be in the room when the next one drops. Hit the bell. I'll see you there.